October 25, 1921. Tampa, Florida. 75-mile-per-hour winds devastate the city. The storm surge rises 10 feet above normal. 8 people die. $5 million in damages, the equivalent of over $80 million today. But the next day, the newspapers publish this. Damage estimates diminish. Few traces are left. How does a hurricane that destroyed entire neighborhoods simply vanish from the historical record? The answer lies in 3 words: money, power, lies. Welcome to the first episode of your channel name. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest climate cover-ups in American history. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is documented history buried for decades in the University of South Florida archives. In 1921, Florida was at the peak of the land boom, the real estate gold rush. Thousands of people arrived every month, buying beachfront property. Businessmen were selling eternal paradise. But nature had other plans. When the hurricane struck Tampa on the afternoon of October 25th, there were no weather apps. There were no alerts on your phone. The Weather Bureau issued the hurricane warning at 12:34 p.m. A few hours later, the city was underwater. Jessie Rohrer, wife of a local businessman, wrote in her diary, winds of 78 miles per hour in gusts. 68 miles per hour sustained for 3 hours. The tide rose through the woods and stopped 50 feet from our house. Trees uprooted, filled with dead chickens floating in the river. Some storm, and she underlined it for emphasis. Some storm. But here's where the story gets dark. Because 48 hours after the disaster, businessmen, politicians, and the press united in a coordinated campaign to erase this hurricane from public memory. Over the next 14 minutes, you'll discover how the Tampa Morning Tribune changed the narrative in just 72 hours. Why businessmen called a Category 1 hurricane just a gale. How this lie planted the seeds for even worse disasters in 1926 and 1928. And why this story was erased from Florida history books. All with real documents. All with archived evidence. Because this is the story they didn't want you to know. It all started 2 days before the storm. October 23, 1921, Sunday, the U.S. Weather Bureau detects a tropical storm of considerable intensity moving through the northwestern Caribbean. The Tampa Morning Tribune publishes a small notice in the Sunday paper. But the local weather office chief, W.J. Bennett, has a different take. It was about 11 years ago that Tampa experienced its closest acquaintance with a hurricane. On October 18, 1910, one passed so close that the barometer reached 28.94 and the wind was 48 miles per hour. No great damage was done locally. Bennett forgot to mention one detail. 10 people died in that 1910 hurricane. But in 1921, Tampa was selling dreams. And hurricanes didn't fit those dreams. At that moment, Florida was experiencing the largest real estate boom in American history. Between 1923 and 1925, over 300,000 people moved to the state. Businessmen were selling beachfront lots to the growing middle class. Tampa promoted itself as the year-round city. Perfect climate. No disasters. Eternal paradise. A hurricane could destroy that image and billions of dollars. October 24th, Monday. At 10:40 a.m., the Weather Bureau issues a storm warning for the Northeast. At 12:34 p.m., the warning is upgraded to a hurricane warning. But there was no social media. There was no TV. There was no time. The morning newspaper headline on October 25th read, "Barometer falls as hurricane heads into Florida's coast." But right below it, in smaller letters, "May pass Tampa by as in all past instances." It might pass Tampa by, like all the times before. Optimism until the very last second. And then, the storm arrived. October 25th, 1921, afternoon, the hurricane strikes Tampa with full force. The eye of the storm passes over Tarpon Springs, 30 miles to the north. But Tampa takes the direct hit. Wind gusts reach 78 miles per hour. Sustained winds remain at 68 miles per hour for 3 hours. The storm surge rises 10.5 feet above normal. 8.5 inches of rain fall in just 24 hours. The barometric pressure plummets. To understand what this means, the storm surge was the highest since 1848. 73 years earlier, entire neighborhoods were submerged. Bayshore Boulevard, the main waterfront avenue, turned into a river. Jessie Rora recorded in her diary, "The tide rose through the woods and stopped 50 feet from our house. 8 feet of water covered my garden. Oak, cedar, myrtle, mulberry, and persimmon trees were uprooted. The garage roof blew off. The river was full of trees with dead chickens caught in the branches." And then she wrote, with irony, "Not our chickens, fortunately. But not everyone was so lucky. In Hyde Park, electrical wires fell onto the porch of a black family's home. 2 children ran to remove the cables. They were electrocuted instantly. The Tampa Daily Times doesn't even mention their names. Just 2 Negro children. 2 nameless children. Just statistics." This is the first sign of how Tampa would handle this tragedy. Minimizing, hiding, erasing. When dawn broke on October 26th, Tampa woke to a scene of devastation. Let's look at the real numbers documented by the Weather Bureau itself. Tampa Electric Company recorded $200,000 in damages, the equivalent of over $3 million today. Peninsula Telephone Company suffered moderate damages. Homes and businesses accumulated losses of $300,000. Nearly $5 million in today's dollars. Public infrastructure required $12,000 in emergency repairs. The total estimated damage was between $2 and $5 million, the equivalent of $32 to $80 million today. Tampa Electric's power plant was completely flooded. Power lines fell throughout the city. The streetcar system, the main public transportation at the time, was destroyed near Ballast Point. The steamship Favorite was torn from its moorings on the east side of the Hillsborough River and thrown onto dry land on the west side, near Plant Park. A 3-story ship, tossed like a toy. But the wealthiest neighborhoods were hit the hardest. The Tribune published a list of sufferers, the term used at the time in Edgewater Park. Mrs. J.H. Tucker had her house completely destroyed and carried 3 blocks by the current. The Ferrara family suffered total loss. And the newspaper made sure to note, in parentheses, Spanish. Because even in destruction, there was class and racial division. The Bayshore Boulevard seawall symbol of the city's progress collapsed. Palmetto Beach, Edgewater Park, DeSoto Park, all obliterated. 8 people died, 2 drowned, 3 electrocuted, and an elderly man, J.D. Wilder, spent the entire night clinging to a palm tree, holding his 85-year-old wife's hand, until the force of the water tore her from his grasp, and she disappeared into the sea. This was the Tampa Hurricane of 1921. Real, documented, deadly. And then, the cover-up began. October 27, 1921, 2 days after the hurricane. The Tampa Morning Tribune headline read, "Damage estimates diminish. Few traces are left. Damage estimates are decreasing. Few traces remain." How is this possible? Simple. Immediate and coordinated cleanup. Boy Scout Executive Roy Bachman issued an order. All Tampa Boy Scouts must put on their uniforms and immediately begin clearing the streets of fallen branches and helping those in distress. Within 48 hours, downtown Tampa was spotless. The newspaper itself recorded, "Any person walking or driving through the downtown section of the city last evening would have been hard put to find a trace of storm damage." 2 days before, total devastation. 2 days later, nothing happened. Magic? No. Coordinated propaganda. Peter O. Knight, vice president of Tampa Electric Company, made a public statement. I deeply regret that some very exaggerated stories have gained space in newspapers in other cities. Stories with only the slightest basis in fact, or no basis at all. And in some cases, wild imaginings. He classified the hurricane as a temporary setback, not as a disaster. And then Knight said something revealing. This state is freer from disasters than any other in the country. Look at the history of the past 73 years. There was the hurricane of 1848 and the big freeze of 1894. 73 years of the state's history and only 2 setbacks. He ignored the yellow fever outbreaks that killed hundreds. He ignored the 1910 hurricane that killed 10 people. And he ignored the hurricane that had just happened. Absolute denial. But the story didn't stop there. The Tampa Realtors Association, made up of land sellers, held an emergency meeting. They approved a resolution demanding that the local press and the Associated Press use their columns to correct the erroneous impressions that had been broadcast, causing great harm to the city and South Florida. And the press obeyed. The Tribune republished editorials from newspapers across the country, all minimizing the hurricane. The Jacksonville Metropolis wrote, "It can be truthfully stated that Florida is less exposed to storms and cyclones than the majority of states in the Union." The Louisville Courier-Journal declared, "It wasn't a hurricane. It was a gale." And it continued, "The sun shines. The sky is glorious again. The mockingbird greets the dawn from the top of the magnolia." Mockingbird. While J.D. Wilder was still searching for his wife's body in the sea. But the final blow came from the Tribune itself. On October 27th, the newspaper published a story about a tornado in California. California gets a bit of a storm too. Tornado strikes Sacramento. Scores of houses unroofed. Hundreds of windows broken. The message was clear. See, other places have disasters too. Florida isn't special in that regard. Total deflection. And it worked. The Tampa City Council minutes from October 31st, 1921, record Resolution 172A. $12,000 were transferred from the Spanish Town Creek Sewer Project funds to emergency post-hurricane cleanup. But publicly, the message was different. Everything's normal. Nothing happened. So why does this story matter? Why does a seemingly small hurricane from 1921 deserve 14 minutes of your time? Because this lie planted deadly seeds. Minimizing the disaster fueled the real estate boom. Between 1921 and 1925, hundreds of thousands of people moved to Florida. They bought beachfront homes, without adequate building codes, without hurricane insurance. Almost nobody had it, because the narrative was simple. Hurricanes don't happen here. And then came 1926. The Miami hurricane destroyed the southeast coast. Over 400 people died. Damages were estimated at $100 million, the equivalent of $1.5 billion today. Peter O. Knight, the same businessman from 1921, complained that the Red Cross was doing more harm than good by requesting donations. According to him, it hurt Florida's image. In 1928, the tragedy was even worse. The killer hurricane hit Lake Okeechobee. The dike broke. A 20-foot wall of water swept through entire towns. Between 2,500 and 3,000 people died. Many were never identified. Most were black plantation workers. Forgotten. Once again, historian Ted Steinberg calls this the politics of forgetting. Researcher Raymond Arsenault states, "Natural disasters killed more people in Florida during this period than at any other time in the state's history. But history books rarely mention 1921, because the cover-up worked. Today, Tampa has over 3 million people in the metro area. If an identical hurricane to the one in 1921 hit the city now, meteorologists estimate damages between $25 and $50 billion. Because we built in vulnerable areas. Because we forgot the past. Because money speaks louder than truth. $5 million in lies. 8 lives erased from the records. 1 hurricane buried in history. But the truth always surfaces. just like the tide of 1921. This is the story they tried to erase. Now you know. Don't let it be forgotten again.